and Black Creek Community Farms has been obviously a huge help in arranging all this and providing all the wonderful food. So today's, can everyone hear me okay over there? Everyone's good? Okay, perfect. So today we are here for ACME's annual lecture as part of the Canadian Association of Geographers, and this year is co-sponsored by the Indigenous Peoples Working Group and the Historical Geography Study Group of the Canadian Association of Geographers. So we have two wonderful speakers today. I'm going to introduce the person, Ruth Colzar-Green, who's going to be giving an introductory lecture first. But before that, Letitia is going to be giving us a few words about where we are right now, about the farm, Black Creek Community Farm, and what they do, and all the wonderful food.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say a few quick things. First, thank you for coming to the Black Creek Community Farm. You're welcome. We opened our gates back in 2013. We are a startup project, really looking at food justice or food injustice in the Jane and Finch community, and trying our best to see how we can do a small part in the struggle. Yeah, welcome. And later on, if you want to talk to any of the staff about some of the programs and events that we run here, our farm festival is actually July 22nd. You're welcome to come. It's free and open to the public. So thank you very much, and welcome to the Black Creek Community Farm.
So Dr. Ruth Colzar-Green, an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at York University, is going to be giving the introductory lecture today. And Ruth is going to be speaking about the complicated relationship to land and how the dish with one spoon can be better understood. So I will hand it over to Ruth.
Awesome.
Do you want me to put this on?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Thank you. Okay, do I have to? Right, I don't want to hold it. There we go. So at this time, usually what is being happening in academia, in community spaces, and community organizing is a statement. Sometimes it's read, and sometimes it's from the heart. However, I'm trying to sometimes disrupt the trite words that are used that may not have full understanding. And so Sego Skano, Ruth Colzar-Green, Yet Haudenosaunee Yogongwe Kanagahage Anwara. I am a Haudenosaunee, meaning I am from this territory. I'm from the Six Nations Confederacy, or the people of the Longhouse. I refuse to use the European bastardized word that means I'm a dirty blood eater for my people, which is what your history books would have told you I was. And it's still in those history books, so I like to disrupt that. In that, I am Ganagahage, or a person of the flint. In the word that is used mostly, people know as Mohawk. I am also from the Turtle Clan, Anwara, and so I have a responsibility to reflect and be able to go inside myself and know who I am. In that, we usually hear people acknowledge this territory that we're on, Takaranto, the place where these sticks grow in the water, as the responsibility to be caretaken by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe of the Three Fires Confederacy, and recently the treaty title holders of Treaty 13A, the Mississaugas New Credit First Nations. In that, there's a lot of history that I know is missing. People also say we're in the dish with one spoon, wampum treaty territory. And so my question is, how much do we know about that treaty? How much do we know about that wampum? And so that's what I'm coming to talk about today. So first off, maybe we should see what it looks like, right? So this is called the dish with one spoon. Has people seen this one before? Some people are like, oh, I've heard of it. Okay, I've heard it, but I didn't know what it looked like. So this sounds really weird. So this treaty, this wampum, is at the very base minimum, obviously not this one, it's a replica, 875 years old. Because what happened 875 years ago is that the great peacemaker came to the Haudenosaunee. And as the great peacemaker, whose name we do not say, traveled up the river up the Great Lakes, he brought with him an understanding of peace and brought together the Haudenosaunee nations under the Confederacy. And as he brought those chiefs together for the first time to sit in council 875 years ago, depending, right? We all know that it's about the eclipse, right? Yeah. No. Okay, don't worry about it. It's a long story. Too long to tell you now, but just giving you a heads up. In that, the great peacemaker told the chiefs that this dish was to hold cut up beaver meat, and we were to serve it to each other, and it would be passed around pre-cut up with no knives, and we'd all serve each other with the same spoon. Dish, one spoon, right? In that, there are 3 teachings that are really important to understand, and the teachings are that we never take more than we need. We always make sure there's enough for the next person. Because if you always make sure there's enough for the next person, guess what? We're all going to get what we need. And the 3rd teaching is that we never sully the dish. We do not dirty the dish. And the dish is to be kept clean. And that's part of the problems that we're experiencing right now. The fact that we're outside, I don't actually think I've ever experienced an outside conference. It's kind of amazing, right? And so this space is part of that governance. And everybody's been invited into this treaty, right? This is not a treaty just for Haudenosaunee. The Anishinaabes also picked up this treaty, and it was brought back and recentered by Chief Tecumseh after the Settler War of 1812. And reminded the Anishinaabes and the Haudenosaunee in this territory that this was our responsibility. It's said to cover the Great Lakes watershed area and the St. Lawrence River. And that's where the Anishinaabes and the Haudenosaunee hold and caretake and have responsibility for this territory. And so that's one of the spaces that we're hearing a lot about. However, I also want to talk about this one, right? This one more people have seen, right? This one seems to get used on a lot of posters for social justice events, doesn't it? It's called Gasventa, or the two-row wampum. And the two-row wampum is said to be a relationship, a treaty relationship. It's about 404 years old. It was originally accepted by the Dutch, followed by the British, and then the French. And the idea is that it was seen as 2 distinct ideologies, Ongwe and those who have come to join us on this land. And it's sometimes poetically said as a steamship and a canoe traveling down a river. I like that. The ideologies from this is that we are distinct, that we have our own political systems and our own ways of governance. And that's usually where the teaching ends, right? However, one of the focuses I love about this belt are the white beads. And the white beads seem not to be discussed as much. And the white beads stand for peace and friendship and mutual respect. And that's the idea that it's what's holding us together, but also holding us as distinct. And we can be as friendly as we want. We can be as peaceful as we want. But can you actually respect somebody if you have no understanding of those stories? And so in order to respect the governance structures and the ways of being, there has to be an acknowledgement of distinction. No, you don't need to understand the cultural, but you need to have an understanding of the responsibilities that we all carry. And so that's where I'm hoping that these conversations can go, is with that peace, friendship, but also the mutual responsibilities and the mutual respect. So yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ruth. I realized beforehand that I forgot to mention that we are videotaping this event. So where it's going to be located, the video camera is right here. If anybody doesn't want to be videotaped, please just don't walk in front of the space here. And also there's washrooms are just around the corner. If you go out the gate, just on the left-hand side there's bathrooms. And I think that's all the housekeeping. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Eve Tuck to share her thoughts with us. Dr. Eve Tuck is an associate professor of critical race and Indigenous studies at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, University of Toronto. She's a William T. Grant Scholar from 2015 to 2020, and Tuck's writing and research is on urban education and Indigenous studies. As a whole, her work focuses on how Indigenous social thought can be engaged and create fair and just social policy, more meaningful social movements, and when that doesn't work, robust approaches to decolonization. Tuck is Unanga and is an enrolled member of the Aleut community of St. Paul Island, Alaska. So Dr. Tuck, thank you so much for coming today and delivering ACME's key lecture. And she is going to be asking, can reconciliation take up place? And I'll leave a lot of the geography jokes aside, but I think that this is a wonderful presentation. I'm very excited to hear it. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Eve Tuck to the stage.
Good evening. Thank you for coming out. I do feel like I should start telling some geography jokes. It's good to be with you, and for those of you who traveled great distances to be here, I really appreciate. I'm glad that your travel brought you here safely. For those of you who are making food for us and who make this place a home and make Jane and Finch, the community of Jane and Finch home, thank you for that work that you are doing, for that loving heart work that you're doing in building this place for your community. Thank you. And thank you to Vanessa, and who's been a terrific organizer, and to other people who have been involved in making this invitation to me to share this lecture with you. I have a couple of different ways of thinking about this question of, can reconciliation take up place? And I'm going to take you through some of those different ways of thinking about that idea. I am from St. Paul Island in Alaska. I'm Unanga, and our people are experiencing very high waters at this time, and with warmer waters, there are consequences for our bird relatives and for our seal relatives. Last year, our community experienced the largest die-off of puffins in recorded history. And also we're going to hear so many sounds as I'm talking with you tonight. We're going to have airplanes and thunder and cars and birds and pizza sizzling. But our community also right now, seals, the first seal, are a really important part of our community. We understand them to be our relatives. And right now the seals are moving towards a part of the island that they've never moved towards before. And so it's very concerning. And so I'm sharing this lecture at a time that people at home are very concerned about what is happening with regard to place. So also today, families in Whitehorse began sharing their experiences of being heartbroken. I can pause if you want to come inside. There's plenty of room under this awesome structure that's here, corrugated metal and wooden structure here. Okay, sure. There's seats up here that are open too. Please feel free to come up.
Yeah, there's 3 up front here too.
So today, families in Whitehorse began sharing their experiences of being heartbroken, of having their lives turned upside down and made unrecognizable because their loved ones have been made missing or murdered. This was the first day of hearings of this national inquiry. There have been many critiques of this process, many concerns raised. Perhaps among the most vocal has been from Christy Belcourt, who has called for a total redesign of the process. Those leading the inquiry say that they are continuing with their plans and hope to address the concerns in future iterations of hearings in other locations. I honor the people that are sharing their stories today and this week in Whitehorse. I honor their loss. I honor their devastation. I am holding space for them, for the experiencing of opening up all of these unanswered questions. I honor that they are sharing their stories in a process that has not yet demonstrated itself to be worthy of these stories. And it is my sincere hope that the process can be improved so that people are sharing their stories in a way that feels like they are being respected and taken seriously. In 2015, I published a book with my colleague Marcia McKenzie at University of Saskatchewan, Saskatoon. Our book is called Place in Research, and we wrote it to intervene on fields of social science, which, because of the expectations of generalizability, the habits of treating place merely as the context for human life and activity, and common practices in social science fields rarely take place seriously. My hopeful sense is that this particular intervention is not needed in this space, and with an audience of geographers who have a sense of the meaningfulness of place. However, I do think that there are some considerations from that book that are useful for me to bring here with regard to what Mackenzie and I have called critical place inquiry, and also in terms of the centering of Indigenous conceptualizations of land and water in discussions of geography and place. So I want to attend to some of those things first before I move into other parts of my discussion. So critical place inquiry understands places themselves as mobile, as shifting over time and space through interactions with flows of people, other species, and social practices. Critical place inquiry entails, at a more localized level, understanding places as both influencing social practices as well as being performed and reshaped through practices and movements of individuals and collectives. Critical place inquiry conceptualizes place as interactive and dynamic due to these time-space characteristics. Critical place inquiry recognizes that disparate realities determine not only how place is experienced, but also how it is understood and practiced in turn. Critical place inquiry addresses spatialized and place-based processes of colonization and settler colonization, and works against their further erasure or neutralization through social science research. Critical place inquiry finally extends beyond considerations of the social to more deeply consider land itself and its non-human inhabitants and characteristics as they determine and manifest place. In trying to frame out critical place inquiry, we're aiming to have further generative and critical politics of places through these conceptualizations, through these practices, and through a relational ethics of accountability to people and place. So my goal here is to attend to decolonial and Indigenous renderings of place, and the ways in which they depart from and collide with conceptualizations of place which come from Western philosophical frames. Decolonizing perspectives and approaches are always spatially and temporally specific. Some scholars and popular media pundits have taken the increased mobility and technological connectivity of the world's populations to mean that place does not matter anymore. Others, especially Neil Smith in his articulation of uneven development in 2008, insist that globalization means that place matters more. Chickasaw scholar Jody Bird, in arguing that Indigenous peoples must be central to theorizations of the conditions of globalization and post-coloniality, offers this insertion to the debate. Bird writes, "For Indigenous peoples, place, land, sovereignty, and memory matter. In a world growing increasingly enamored with faster, flatter, smooth, where positionality doesn't matter so much as how it is that we travel there, indigeneity matters." Bird's point is that mistakenly concluding that place no longer matters can be avoided if indigeneity becomes a lens through which to view globalization and post-coloniality. Indigenous perspectives must be at the center of decolonizing theories and practices. Decolonizing conceptualizations of place confront, undermine, disavow, and unsettle understandings of place which emerge from what Mary Louise Pratt calls Europe's planetary consciousness. Seneca scholar Mishana Goman observes that this planetary consciousness, which still largely orders the world, has had major implications for native and non-native communities alike. Colonization resulted in a sorting of space based on ideological premises of hierarchies and binaries. Settler colonialism continues to depend on imposing a planetary consciousness and naturalizing geographic concepts and sets of social relationships. Quechua scholar Sandy Grande elaborates the deep structures of what Grande calls colonialist consciousness, which closely corresponds to Pratt's term, European planetary consciousness. These are the animating beliefs which course through colonialist societies, hegemonic perspectives that serve as common sense. These deep structures involve 5 core beliefs. 1, a belief in progress as change, and change as progress. 2, a belief in the effective separateness of faith and reason. 3, a belief in the essential quality of the universe and of reality as impersonal, secular, material, and relativistic. 4, a subscription to ontological individualism. And 5, belief in humans as separate from and superior to the rest of nature. Grande posits that contemporary cultural and ecological crises can be credited to these deep structures. They both afford and justify environmental degradation, cultural domination, and the practices of, quote, overdeveloped, overconsumptive, and over-empowered first world nations and their environmentally destructive ontological, axiological, and epistemological systems. Erstwhile, Indigenous philosophies of place predate and have continued to co-develop alongside of and in spite of these deep structures of European planetary consciousness. Synthesizing the role that place in Indigenous philosophical frameworks, Anishinaabe scholar Vine Deloria Jr. argues that power and place produce personality. Not Anishinaabe, Dakota, excuse me. Scholar Vine Deloria Jr. argues that power and place produce personality. This equation simply means that the universe is alive, but also that it contains within it the very important suggestion that the universe is personal and therefore must be approached in a personal manner. This is why people in this territory put down tobacco. and smudge. That the personal nature of the universe demands that each and every entity in it seek and sustain personal relationships. Indigenous philosophies of place represent significant epistemological and ontological departures from those that have emerged from Western frames. Yet, in Indigenous worldviews, relationships to land are not overly romantic. It might be more accurate to say that they are familiar. And if sacred, they are sacred because they are familiar. Raramuri ethnobotanist Enrique Salmon argues that when Indigenous people speak of the land, the religious and romantic overtones that are so prevalent in Western environmental conversation are absent. To us, land exists in the same manner as do our families, chickens, the river, and the sky. No hierarchy of privilege places one above or below the other. Everything is woven into a managed, interconnected tapestry. Within this web, there are particular ways that living things relate to one another. One Raramuri's elder mentioned that it is the reason why people should collect plants in the same ways that fish should breathe water and birds eat seeds and bugs. These are the things that we are supposed to do. Salmon locates the tendency to romanticize Indigenous relationships to land inside the Western cultural tradition, a misunderstanding of the nexus of Indigenous identity and land. So it seems self-evident that a discussion on decolonizing conceptualizations of land would primarily draw on conceptualizations by Indigenous peoples. That seems self-evident to me. It doesn't seem self-evident to everybody else. But as Wayne Yang and I have argued, the discourse of decolonization is frequently invoked without reference to the works and lives of Indigenous people. At a conference, it's not uncommon to hear speakers refer almost casually to the need to decolonize their field, or decolonize their practice, or decolonize their schools or their methods, or even decolonize people's thinking, their own students' thinking. Yet, Wayne and I have observed a startling number of these discussions that make no mention of the significant Indigenous social thought that is at the basis of discussions of decolonization. Makes no mention of our struggles for the recognition of our sovereignty, or the contributions, again, of Indigenous intellectuals and activists to theories and frameworks of decolonization. There is often little recognition given to the immediate context of settler colonialism in North America on Turtle Island, where many of these conferences take place. So in these instances, the discourse of decolonization is epistemically severed from the specific colonial contexts from which it emerges. The result is the use of decolonization as a synonym for civil and human rights-based social justice projects. This is problematic because decolonization seeks something quite different than those forms of justice. The too easy adoption of decolonizing discourse is a kind of inclusion that is also a form of enclosure, dangerous in how it domesticates decolonization. It is also a foreclosure, limiting in how it recapitulates dominant theories of social change. So this is why in the article, Decolonization is not a metaphor, that we wanted to clarify that when metaphor invades decolonization, it kills the very possibility of decolonization. It recenters whiteness, it resettles theory, it extends innocence to the settler, and it entertains a settler future. Decolonize and decolonization cannot easily be grafted onto pre-existing discourses and frameworks, even if they are critical, even if those frameworks are anti-racist, even if they are social justice frameworks. Decolonization within settler nation states is complicated because there is no spatial separation between empire, settlement, and the colony. When decolonization is allowed to stand as metaphor, it papers over this complexity, backing away from the very aspects of decolonization that are unsettling. Though the details are not fixed upon or agreed upon, decolonization in the settler colonial context must involve the rematriation of indigenous land, simultaneously to the recognition of how land and relations to land have always already been differently understood and enacted. And we're talking about all of the land, and we're not talking symbolically. This is precisely why decolonization is necessarily unsettling, especially across lines of solidarity. Settler colonialism and its decolonization implicates and unsettles everyone. Megan Bang and her colleagues differentiate Western connotations of place from Indigenous connotations of land by invoking Brian Yazzie Burkhart's discussion of Descartes' insistence, I think, therefore I am. So Burkhart revises this statement, I think, therefore I am, away from an individualist focus toward a more Indigenous understanding. We are, therefore I am. To express the saliency of collectivity in Indigenous life and knowledge systems. Bang and her colleagues extend Burkhart's revision in order to compare notions of place to notions of land. So, they write that similarly we might imagine that the ontology of place-based paradigms is something like I am, therefore place is, in contrast to the ontology of land-based paradigms, which might be summarized as land is, therefore we are. Bang and her colleagues seem to be saying that the ontology of place prioritizes and centers the individual human, the surveyor of place, whereas an ontology of land prioritizes and centers land, which constitutes the life of the collective. This represents a profound distinction that cannot be overlooked. Understandings of collectivity and shared, though not necessarily synchronous, relationships to land are core attributes of an ontology of land. Further, and this is not a romantic point, the land we ontology articulated by Megan Bang and her colleagues is incommensurable with anthropocentric notions of place. Daniel Wildcat insists that Indigenous means to be of